Is the Church of England too managerial, too much run like a company nowadays? And have we lost our core calling? Hi, welcome to the channel. My name is Rev Dan. I'm a vicar in the Church of England. On this channel, you get all my views as a parish priest on all the Christian news happening in the world today. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment down below, share it, and don't forget to hit that notification bell. Also, subscribe to my Substack where you get extra content put out on there, and you can support the channel there as well. So I'm going to go through two articles, both from the Telegraph, and I know there's a lot of people in the Church of England who don't like the Telegraph, saying they're too harsh on the Church of England, but in one way or another, there's no smoke without fire. One of the articles is based on a report by Civitas, and the other is actually from a Church of England priest, the Reverend Fergus Butler Ghali, and they're both talking pretty much about the same thing, about the Church of England wasting money, being very much top heavy in each of the dioceses, and also getting back to that core mission of what the church is supposed to do. So the articles were published within 2 days of each other. And the first one based on the report, which is linked down below. Interesting report to read. It's kind of been refuted by the Church of England, but you know, this discussion needs to be had, and especially with the new Archbishop of Canterbury coming in. And I've done a video on this as well, which you can watch here, on all the things they have to handle, and who might be Archbishop coming in who will turn the Church of England around. And we all know, as I've said so many times on this channel, the Church of England is so split over the living in love and faith prayers and the debate and where that's going. And it looks like July next year at the General Synod will be the time that we know everything. February is looking less likely for anything except for an update to happen. So there's between now and then probably maybe is the appointment of the Archbishop of Canterbury. We don't know exact date that an Archbishop might be appointed, but it could be before the General Synod in July. But all of these need to go into the conversation. Now, the Church of England has 42 dioceses. They are independent of each other. They have their own structures, their own ways of working. And then you have probably what you call the national church, and with the archbishops of York and Canterbury and the church commissioners. And then you have your local church, your local parishes that cover every inch of the land. So we all work differently in one way or another, and maybe part of the problem. So this report by Civitas came out, wasn't complimentary in what's happening at the moment, but the Telegraph have written this article, and let's get into it. So the title of the article says, Church of England spending excessively on HR and diversity officers, report warns. Civitas research finds a managerial turn in Anglican Church has left ordinary parishes struggling to survive. So it says the Church of England is overspending on HR and diversity officers at the expense of parishes, a report has warned. And so just from the outset, the clergy are office holders. We have nothing to do with HR because of our roles is just different. But so HR is to do with those who are employed by the diocese, and diversity officers, well, we'll get into that. Research by the think tank Civitas found that a managerial turn in the Anglican Church in the past 2 decades has left ordinary parishes struggling to survive. And like I say, a lot of parishes are struggling to survive at the moment. The report released on Wednesday said the Church's 42 dioceses had taken on large number of staff since the turn of the millennium, while merging parishes and reducing clergy numbers to cut costs. And this is what happens. If you got a parish and the diocese, along with those local churches, will have conversations. It's called pastoral reorganisation. And you know, a lot of churches will push back against this. Some churches will go with it because they know that they can't afford to survive by themselves or another vicar, or have a vicar. So going into a larger team is helpful. But I know some parishes are just didn't want to be in what they call a benefice, a group of parishes. And so when you have the more churches you have a benefice, it might reflect the clergy numbers there, but you might have one clergy for 6 parishes or 6 churches. So in a parish, you can have a parish with 1 church, you can have a parish with 2 churches, but usually it's 1 parish, 1 church. But everything's different across the land. But the bigger the benefice, I think a question was asked at General Synod, and I think it's in Norfolk somewhere, that there was one benefice that had 32 churches, and you got 30 churches in one benefice, and I can't imagine trying to grow a benefice when you got 6 churches, 4 churches, and just running around in the geographical location and dealing with each of those individual churches and trying to get out into the community to grow. It's I've always said more clergy on the front line, and I think that's what will grow the churches and enable the churches to grow, implement discipleship, preach the gospel. The other thing is, of course, with the LLF, there are different theologies out there as well, and that does affect church growth, as it has been seen statistically. The churches that are growing are those who uphold the doctrine of the church, of the gospel, and whether they be evangelical or even Anglo-Catholic now. So, but it says that they are merging parishes to produce benefices, and so you get less clergy to look after more churches, and this means clergy costs are cut. These administrative positions, this is in the central diocesan house. These administrative positions include human resource jobs and a series of politicalized roles such as diversity, social justice, LGBT, and net zero offices, the report found. It means that the diocese across the country now employ so many people that on average there is 1 administrator to every 3.5 priests, which is quite astonishing if you think about it. The Church of England, it's like retail. I used to work in retail. It's in shops, that's where you get your money. That's where you need frontline staff in stores to serve customers, and so same in the church. Your front line is the local church, the local parish. And so to have, and like I said, each diocese is independent of each other, but across the board, on average, taking those numbers, to have 1 administrator per 3.5 priests is this is why this report was written. Questionable where the money is being spent, and the big question and the big debate, is it being spent well and in the right way? Again, are you taking the frontline staff away, which are the ones out there preaching the gospel? I'm not saying these people aren't preaching the gospel. I hope they're getting out and preaching the gospel. But actually, we live our lives amongst the people in our parish. There's a lot of clergy who are full-time, work 6 days a week. Some are part-time, some are house for duty. And so they work different hours and days, but their whole role is getting out to serve their parish in all the different ways that we do. So that is the one thing that will need to be really addressed in each diocese, is the money being spent well. And remember, it's a lot of the money that goes to the diocese is from the local church in what we call parish share or common fund or quota. That the money that is given to the local church goes to support the diocese, and we'll see that in the next article as well. Analysis concluded for the report went on to find that 21% of diocesan spending on administrative cost, almost double that of large charities like Oxfam 10% and the RNLI 12%. It's quite astonishing. A spokesman for the Church of England said that we don't recognise the picture painted in this report. I know people who will not give to charities unless they've checked on the Charity Commission and seen how much their overhead costs are. So how many pennies in the pound go on your administrative costs? So in a sense, Oxfam, say it was £1 is given, for every £1 is given, 10p is spent on administrative. For every £1 given, 12p for the RNLI. 12p is spent on administrative. In the Church of England, on average across all the dioceses, for every £1 given, 21p is spent on administrative cost and 79p is spent on everything else, which is a large amount. And people wouldn't give, and you kind of see that I do know people who withhold their giving to the local church now because they don't want it to be spent on the diocese, on the head office, as it were. They want the money to remain in the local church, so they give in different ways, maybe to local charities, or because they don't want to give in that way that their money will just be gone. And or if churches have got like a friends of that church, they give to the friends, so they might know the money will be spent for our church. We have the Friends, the Chapel of St Giles Parish Church, that help us maintain the building for historical significance and the good of the community. And so people will give to that, knowing that the money will be spent in one way or another on the church. And it also helps us as a church to not spend much money on the maintenance. So in a roundabout way, those people know that they can give to the local church and it will help benefit the church. And so that's a large amount of money being spent that way. So it's got a little graph here, how the church raises and spends money, proportion of income and expenditure by group. So on the income, it's given and fundraising is 52%, trade in investments and rentals 19%, grants and legacies 17%, and others 13%. And expenditure, church costs and salaries 38%, parish share 31%, including other capital 19%. Charity and outreach 7%, and trading and fundraising 5%. They don't talk about in here this percentage is not the actual amount, but you can just see on that graph. We've all got income and expenditure on this. Esme Partridge, the author of the report, told the Telegraph that the Church of England spends millions of pounds on bureaucracy at the expense of parish churches. In dioceses across the country, numbers of parish clergy are being cut, and those who remain tend to be thinly spread across large areas, she said. The result is the disappearing presence of the church within each community and potentially the loss of local heritage, charity and welfare. Against the CofE's claim that the traditional parish model is unsuited to the networks of contemporary life, this report argues that there has never been a better time to revive the parish as a source of tradition, sanctity and community solidarity. And I would agree with that. Life is changing, but the church remains central to each local community. If you're in a village like mine, it's much more identified. If a church is in a larger town or city, it's in an area, but it's still identified as a local church. And so as the world changes, the never-ending change of what the church is and what the church stands for is actually very attractive to people. And I saw when the Queen died, we opened our doors, put a little video out on the local Facebook group and said, well, the doors are open. We are here for you, to speak with you, to pray with you, because so many people were upset and they would come down to the local church. And I remember when I was in training to be a vicar in my curacy, I spoke to the local Baptist minister, and he said, we speak about the Church of England, he said, the Church of England, you've got a bigger boat to fish from because they know where you are. He said, if anything happens, they don't know where the Baptist church is. They might in some areas, but it's not so identifiable as an historic church like the churches that the Church of England has. I said, we have to work harder, he said. People will just come to you. And so we don't need in one way to change the model so much. And in an interview I did, and you can watch that video here, with Gen Z, a person with Gen Z, and talk about Gen Z, the way that they been brought up, actually what they're finding in the church, the traditions, the liturgy and those things are really attractive because anything goes with them. They can be anything they want, and they are looking for certainty, and the parish model works. And that's our identity as Anglicans. We've got lots of other denominations coming up, ones that are growing, ones that are on the edge of town in big warehouses and things like that, and that's their model. Why we should stay. I'm not saying that we don't adapt, Not saying that we don't go and do stuff within our local community in different buildings and stuff like that, but still understand that the parochial model works, and it can work really well. And people want that. They don't, in a sense, want the church to change. And I bet a lot of people who are outside the Church of England will say, no, we think that's quite good of who you are, that you are unchanging in a forever changing world. And like I said, we can do different things in different ways, in different places, but still keeping our identity. The report also found that significant funds are being directed by the church to strategic mission and ministry investment schemes, which often involve the merging of parishes. It pointed to one project in Lincoln Lancs where the Diocese of Liverpool was given £1.2 million to reorganise churches into 7 hubs accompanied by worship communities in unconventional settings. In a report later commissioned by the diocese, it was found that church-going in the town declined by 30% and donations from congregants fell by a third following the pastoral reorganisation. And I did a video on this, and I was shocked, actually. I was really shocked. It was a disaster. And actually, I think there was 29 churches, and was it 10 or 19 of the churches are closing or near on closing. They lost so much money on this, with the giving going down as well, because part of the model is we'll merge it into one huge parish. We'll take away a lot of the priests, and what we want is the local congregants to start running the churches. And they just said, no, we're not going to do that. In fact, it's not only that we're not going to do that, we're going to withdraw our money as well. So not only did they spend money on this and it kind of lost that money, but they lost money by being given through the pastoral reorganisation. And it took away that parochial model of what church was, and having local parish priests. And it was a disaster, and Save the Parish has spoken about this as well. And that video actually got quite, I wasn't expecting it to get that many views, but it did, because people are concerned about this. We see this happening in Leicester. We see this happening in Truro. Again, I've done videos on that. You can search the channel for those videos. How they're changing the way of the Church of England, the Anglican model with the parish, and creating larger areas of churches with fewer clergy, wanting the local parishioners who attend the church to basically run the church and do all the work of the parish priest. But you know what I found was, in conversation with people and just seeing, when you have a vacancy between two incumbents, we call it an interregnum, one leaves or retires, and they go through that process maybe a year before they get the next vicar. The church is run by the church wardens and the congregants, and they work hard and they keep the church going. And when the vicar comes, they go, oh great, we got a vicar, we can step back. We all want, by the way, people to serve in our church, but we know that there are less volunteers now, and especially since the pandemic, so that adds extra work for all the ministries that we do as well, trying to find people to help with those really important ministries with less volunteers. But the thing is, with those interregnums, it's that final statement, yes, we got a vicar, we can step back. And these new models are asking people to really have a perpetual vacancy, and it is not sustainable, because these people are either older now, especially the aging congregation of the Church of England, or those new people coming in who are younger. Both parents are now working just to pay the bills, and then when they get back, they're looking after the children, and so they don't have that much extra time today as they once did many years ago. And so that's where society is changing, making pastoral reorganisation churches, more churches in areas and benefices with less clergy, it will not help to grow the church, in my opinion. So they say, by both expanding the diocesan bureaucracies and finding new models are part of a managerial turn within the Church of England, which has led ambitious new projects to be prioritised over supporting support for existing congregants, the report stated. Since 1969, more than 2,000 Church of England churches, 15% of the total, have closed, 300 of which have shut their doors between 2016 and 2021, which is, a huge amount. I'm not against, in one way or another, closing churches. If churches have become unsustainable, as a local parish priest, and you really have got no congregation in the church, yet you're spending time leaving one church which could have a good congregation to go to a church that's only got 2 or 3 people turning up to do a service there, and hoping that they turn up as well, and you've had to leave that coffee time after the service in the first church, which is important to have conversations, to catch up with people, have pastoral conversations, or just to have those side conversations about what's happening in church and things that are coming up and planning. To leave that to go to a church that's got a few people really in there, I think it's not sustainable. It doesn't help the coffee time, and the coffee time is actually such an important time for fellowship as well. And to see the priest run out the door, well, it's can be disconcerting for some people. That they're there for the service and then they always have to go, and we don't get to spend any time with them, and we don't get to see them because we're always running around all these churches. So I'm not against closing down churches if they're not sustainable, and that's what happens in the real world. That's what happens in, like I say, in retail. If a shop is absolutely losing money, why are you going to keep that shop going if it's costing you money? So I did archaeology at university, and I love history, and so there is a thing about the church and the history of the church. It does break my heart when I see churches that are hundreds of years old and they're just derelict and empty. But it's about reimagining what church is. I think that's, rather than close it, is the congregation goes, but reimagining what the church building can be used for the local community, and could something be grown out of that, rather than so probably. And some of them I would say let's not close, but let's reimagine. And some of them that are a bit more modern churches and no historical significance, well, perhaps they can just close and put money in those other places of historical significance. The number of stipendiary incumbents, ministers who are paid a salary by the church, is also in decline in many dioceses, including the Diocese of Sheffield, where there were 155 such ministers in 1999, but 83 will exist in 2025, marking a decline of 46%. That's huge. And it'd be interesting to look into exactly what that is, but 155 ministers. We know that the Church of England attendance has been in decline for quite a few years now, and that does pose real difficulties with finance, because it's a lot of money comes from the local church to pay for their minister, and if churches can't pay their money, of course they're going to have less ministers. So I get that's a reality as well, but a 46% decline is absolutely huge. And again, the less ministers you got, the less the less parish priests you got out there on the coalface to lead those churches, to do those pastoral services and visits, and just be there in the local community. It's you want someone there in a collar. It makes you feel safe, like they want bobbies on the beat. The report stated, these choices are not, it would seem, being made out of financial necessity. The church commissioners are the custodians of a 10 billion endowment fund, which was really instituted for the sole purpose of providing support for parishes. Why then is it not being spent on saving them? Which we'll get into the next article into this. The Church of England have got this £10 billion endowment fund, which they make a huge amount of money on, but we don't have that in the local parish. It's very distant from the local parish. It's like having I wouldn't even say a rich uncle. It's like a really rich distant cousin, and where we struggle to raise money, but we also give a lot away in parish share. You kind of do go, well, the church, national church, got all this money, and here we are struggling, and we're the ones on the coalface. The report recommended that dioceses share back office functions to cut costs, which I think is good, but because the dioceses are independent of each other, they have their own costs and their own structures. And it would be good to, as a going future, if you want to streamline and get more modern, is to work out how across the diocese that back office functions could be shared to cut costs, and that, so more money could be spent on frontline. Direct money to ordinary parishes to fund more ministers and reduce the amount of parish share donations churches have to make to their diocese every year, which is absolutely right. The spokesman for the Church of England said, "We don't recognise the picture painted by this report, which appears to fundamentally misunderstand how clergy are paid and ignore the essential frontline support dioceses provide to parishes across the country in everything from safeguarding to finance." And I'm sure they're right in one way or another. And they do have, I'm not going to deny that the resources are fantastic that they have in the diocese, because they would interview for these people, and these people would be very specialised in in whatever thing. It might be children and youth, or it might be giving, or whatever it might be. But we have to access them. We have to phone them. You'll never get a phone call, or you might get email updates on things and ideas and stuff. But it's the local church will have to access them, and that's probably just the nature of the beast, because it depends on how many churches each diocese have, how that is. But it's us to them rather than them to us. Apart, like I say, from what I know, just emails on ideas and updates and newsletters and things like that. But there are other things that are important, safeguarding and having those safeguarding officers and for anything. And to be honest, we don't want to access them because we want to make sure our safeguarding is good and there's no safeguarding instances. But if a safeguarding incident does happen, it's really good to have the safeguarding backup there, especially with what's been going on in the Church of England today. And this article finishes, contrary to the image of the report portrays, the Church of England churches have seen notable growth in the last year, with overall congregations passing 1 million again in 2023, a tribute to the faithfulness of clergy, parish volunteers and parishioners across England in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and serving the local communities. So this has come up, over 1 million people are attending, not weekly, it's not 1 million people weekly, it's what they call the worship communities, the amount of people that would come to church, so those who might come once a month, including the worshipping community, which has now gone back to over 1 million. But if you think we're in a country, I don't know how many people in this country now, like 68, 70 million, maybe more. We got 1 million who attend at least once a month across the whole of England. It's it's a very it's a small percentage, and it always will be, because we know that the gate is narrow for those who will come to know Christ. But it has seen a huge decline over years. There's many more people coming to churches, and that affects as well. So I will be fair in some of this. The less people you got coming to church, the less money is being given, the less that you can the less money you have going back to the diocese who can pay clergy on the front line. I get that. This article here is saying that they have too many people in each head office, diocesan house, doing jobs which are not essential for frontline ministry. I'm not saying that all jobs aren't essential, but as they said up here, they got diversity officers and net zero officers and social justice and LGBT. I don't know if they're all paid. Some of them are, to be fair, they are voluntary in there as well. But each of those takes away, you could say, from frontline clergy, which goes on to this article released the next day by Fergus Butler-Ghali, who is a parish priest. And the headline says, the Church of England has nothing to learn from the civil service. Cash-strapped parishes must be free to focus on their core mission, not tied up in management jargon. So this gets down to the local nitty-gritty what I've been talking about, which I am involved in. So he says, if you want to wind up your vicar this Christmas, then ask how fundraising is going. Given the current standard of morale amongst parish clergy, it would be it would take a Christmas miracle for them to smile sweetly and and give a bland reply. I was just thinking that please don't ask. Please do not ask that. Lots of people moan about being asked to put something in the plate at Christmas, but in truth I know of some churches who only survive due to the Christmas collections, which is really sad, isn't it, that you got churches who depend on Christmas collections to survive. And if the attendance is down as it has been since the pandemic, you're going to get less in. And with the financial crisis and people having less money in their pocket and inflation being so high before, when the electricity and gas prices being so high, and that perhaps going on in the future, there'll be less to give from those who come at Christmas, and that will be really impactful on a lot of churches. He says it's an oft repeated trope that the church has loads of money. Well, up to a point, Bishop Copper. The church commissioners have an investment fund circa of 10.4 billion. But when it comes to the church, where you might pop your head in for carols or midnight mass, they don't see a penny of it. Let's put this in perspective. In seconds, this helped me understand how much billions are. If £1 million is 11 seconds, a billion is 32 minutes, right? Get your head around that. If £1 million is 11 seconds, a billion is 32 minutes. Now, the Church of England's got 10.4 billion, and as he says, the local church doesn't see a penny of it. And this is what happens. He goes on to explain what happens. In the 1970s, an asset grab in the name of fairness, as they so often are framed, erased the ancient irregularities of having some parishes worth more than others. Now, nobody saying goes into ministry to make a buck, but the irritation is that this shift fundamentally changed the financial relationship between parish and the central church. And so this was, back then, you had some parishes that were very rich and could pay their local vicar a good wage, and you had some parishes that weren't, and the local vicar would go there for their calling. God's called them there, but they knew they weren't going to get much money. And what happened in the 70s was to make that fair, that everybody got a stipend. But there is, one thing. In each diocese now, they pay, each diocese will pay differently. So I know Guildford pays well, I think Oxford pays well, but there are some dioceses that don't pay as well. And there is a standard of living across the country to take into account as well. It's more expensive to live in some areas than others. But not every clergy across the Church of England is paid exactly the same. Each diocese will pay different. But in that asset grab that he talks about, the local vicarages and some of the buildings were taken into control or put into a charity trust in the diocese. And so there are many churches who are built previous to this, the local vicarages. They spent the money on them, and the ownership went over to the diocese, and many of those have been sold now. I think some churches would have got a percentage of the money back, but had they owned it themselves and decided we're going to sell this because we can get lots of money, and then we can get a smaller place and build a different house, a smaller house, and so that frees up money for the church. So we have lost that, and the local parish who originally built the building have lost that ability. The money went to the diocese, and so that's one of the negative things that's come out of this, rather than one of the positives. The positive is that each clergy now do get paid. So he goes on, today parishes are still expected to pay their share to the diocese, but most historical assets have been centrally grouped, and the profits from them go to, you guessed it, the centre as well. So that's the other thing. So, and I think this was something from the 1700s with Queen Anne's bounty. There was what they called the tithe, and the fields that was the rent that were rented out, and the money came to the local church. That was also taken centrally. So all the money that is earned from farmers' fields, perhaps now houses and things like that, is now taken centrally. And we also pay our parish share centrally as well, which can be a lot. Some churches can pay up to 70%, even more, of their income to parish share. So he says, now all this would be just another minor gripe were it not for the fact that the central church has proved to be so cavalier with those assets. The commissioners do free up cash from time to time, but never for the parishes. Indeed, dioceses often act like the mafia. He doesn't hold back here, withholding funds or staff from parishes that don't toe the line. Money can be found for new disciples, projects or fresh expressions, for initiatives which undermine or supersede the ministry of the parishes on the ground. It can be dished out merrily to external consultants or to favourites of a particular church party, but I can almost guarantee you that the vicar whose hand you shake at the door this Christmas won't see a penny. And that is true. Different dioceses, they will put money towards new projects. Years ago it used to be called fresh expressions, but if with a lot of housing estates going up and there's new housing estates ministry, you can I've known this personally, you see a lot of money going into that new housing estates ministry. You're in a church which is an old, hundreds of years old, established church. You want to get money to revitalise the ministry that's happening there, but because you're in an established church, you've got a church building, you're not going to get anything because everything's going to new estates ministry, which hasn't got a church there, but they're trying to put money in there. I'm not saying that's wrong at all, because on new estates we do want the Christian witness out there as well, but not at the expense of someone who's going into a church who's got a real passion, is on fire for the gospel and really wants to do stuff, but is hamstrung because that local church hasn't got much money. And you're going, well, we need money to do these things, and then you can't get hold of the money because you're not in the right context. And it is frustrating, but as he says, there are other nuances in there as well. In the furore of the Archbishop's resignation, another scandal that illustrated this problem perfectly got lost. The Church of England spent vast amounts of money on a report by Lord Boateng, which not only maligned most of its churchgoers, but as tragic. But a word in here that I can't say, and I can't pronounce words when I read them. I did look this one up. I did look it up before, but because it was so long ago, I forgot how to pronounce it. Troglodytic racist, but also admitted that it is absolutely no evidence for this assertion, but rather had based it on vibes. So that troglodytic, you know what? If I could even say it, if I even now pronounce it, sorry, I wouldn't be even able to say it. That's like caveman type mentality. That when I looked that word up. But it wasn't actually based on facts, it was more on vibes. It was an awful report, and it really came really badly. And I don't know how the local churches really felt about this, saying, you're racist because we just feel that you are. And a lot of money was spent on that as well. So thank you for calling a small rural parish racist based on just what people thought, without facts. The professional managerial chased will have been vast amounts of money to churn out this rubbish, money in part provided by the very people they slander in the report. And that's the thing, the parish share goes into that money. The diocese also have to pay for the central church as well, and so they pay their money. So it does go up the chain, and then we have to get the report to tell us we're not nice people. Of course, the CofE isn't alone in this. Every institution in the country is under the Babylonian captivity of managers. The NHS, the civil service, the BBC, all labour under consultants who sell voodoo magic fixes and empty nonsense and cost lots of money for its practitioners, and then does the square root of naff all for the institution itself. However, it is particularly odious in the church, which is supposed to be a model, a different way of doing things, to speak of eternal truths of profound meaning, to not look to best practice in the secular world, but to God. And that's, I think this is getting down to the nitty gritty of this. We are a church. We live in the world, but not of the world. We should operate differently. But I have spoken to someone very high up in a diocese, in the senior leadership team, and they told me once that that diocese was like a PLC now. It was a PLC. It's all about money, money, money. If you don't give enough money, you're not going to get. And so this is how some dioceses will operate. If the local church can't afford the local vicar, no matter on the context, if you can't afford to pay for full-time vicar, you'll get a part-time vicar. When a vacancy comes up, they'll put you down a part-time. Even some places for household duty, if you really can't pay. And the context could be that there's 10,000 people in the local parish and Church of England schools and maybe an old people's home. And it's down to, no, you can't pay. Well, actually, the context is key. Well, context is king, as we say when we preach as well. Context is king. What is the context? What happens if we could get a really good vicar in this church with these over 10,000 people with all these different contexts, could revitalise that church. But a vicar preaching the gospel, an orthodox vicar that stands on the teachings of the Bible. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. And the church needs people like that in that context, and not on the basis of what the church at that particular time, in that moment in history, can afford to pay for. And so we look to God, we trust in God, we discern what God wants to do in that local church, and who God is calling. And then we put our money where our mouth is, as they say. Not you get what you pay for. I think this is such a secular thing now. What's God doing? What does God want? And let's just live by faith. Put the money out there and trust that this person is the right person for that church, and we will see growth. We will see growth. So focus goes on. At a recent training day, I had endless guff about leading change management wafted at me. When I pointed out that it might be the job of a priest to be constant in an ever-changing world, I was looked at as if I was from Mars. None of this current trend is ever grounded in theology, but entirely lifted up from another managerialist code of practice. At this 2-day leadership event, Jesus Christ was mentioned once. Oh, I see. This is what I mean. That's what I just said. We are different. We are about spreading the good news of Christ, bringing the kingdom of God to where we are in our parish. We are led by the Holy Spirit. And when we get too worldly in our institution, well, that's when the rock creaks in, as it were. And that's what we start relying on. We don't live by faith. We don't say, yes, God, we know what you are calling us to do. You've made that clear, and we will now live by faith, and we will put the money in, and we know that you will be faithful and support us through this and give us all that we need. That's what many good biblical God-fearing local churches will do. They will live by faith. We live in the world, as I said, but not of the world. And to be at a 2-day leadership event, so I'm guessing that he's for clergy, is well, it doesn't even matter for clergy. If it's to do with the diocese, then to have Jesus Christ mentioned once is awful. Under well-being is shadowy consolation. He puts words in. I'm just a normal everyday bloke. Consigliere William Nye. The Church of England lifted wholesale the recruitment practices of the civil services for the appointment of senior leaders, as if the skills required to run the Department of Transport might have any bearing at all on what it might mean to be a shepherd of souls. And I saw this when I was at theological college. And I was there from 2013 2015. There were people identified, and we became aware, there were people identified to be fast-tracked. I'm not saying that these people weren't good, and there was one of them who was really good. But I got a friend who was identified to become a bishop, got ordained after me, identified to be fast-tracked through because he had had the right skills, again, he would be a fantastic bishop. I'm not denying that these people shouldn't. But as these people are identified as good and fast-tracked through the system, I thought, where's God in this? Where's God in this? We don't want, and I'm sure God doesn't want, all these people with the right necessary skills. It might be that for a time, the archdeacon or the bishop is a particular person. They might not be seen having the right skills, or that they might be seen as being quite quiet. But actually, as we know in church life, God calls those people who he knows will lead that church at that particular time. And it could be the same, like I say, with the bishop. Actually, it's not the most managerial, the outgoing, or the structural change. It might just be a real quietly godly pastoral person who will be such a blessing in such a way that we would never know, but God does. And it's that person. But they will get overlooked just because they're quiet. I remember thinking this. What is going on here? This is so, and remember, because I was just coming out of the secular world, this is what was happening in the secular world, and I saw it happening here, and I was like, this is this is not like what church is supposed to be. But hey ho. But we leave it to God. We leave it to God. Same with the appointments of bishops and archdeacons. Now it feels. I'm not saying it is, but it just feels a bit too process now. But it has been for years, and quite very political for years and years and years. But we need to get back to who's God calling? Who's God calling? But he goes on to say, yet there are signs of hope. Some bishops get it, Dorchester, Ransbury and Chelmsford, to name a few, and realise it is the job of the centre to resource what is on the ground rather than to sap energy and morale. And it is good. It is to really support on the ground. The trouble is, I don't know who's the Bishop of Ransbury, but Dorchester and Chelmsford, again, theologically, we don't agree, and then that's where LLF comes in. See, what we find in the Church of England now is we'll find common ground to agree on and go, there's way too much power at the centralised now, and it needs to go back to the local church, and and to resolve the local church. But then LLF comes and it just makes it all difficult and complicated. But that's got to be understood in the mix as well. The new archbishop's in tray will be the stuff of nightmares, but an easy win would be a bonfire of management and a refocusing on the core mission of the Church of England, namely showing the love of God to his people on the ground. In doing so, the church might even recover a prophetic voice to a culture groaning under the weight of managerial nonsense. Now that really would be a Christmas miracle. And wouldn't it be amazing that coming in and reorganising, and I think, as I've said many times, God is shaking the tree of the Church of England, and things are changing, and he's getting us back hopefully on the right track, is that we could show the world a better way of working, because that's what we're about as well, to show a better way, to live a better way, and to say, look how you work, look how the church works so well, and be an inspiration to those who will take that the way the church works into their business, a Christian way, into their businesses, how we treat people, how we structure the businesses and organisations and things, because it works so well in the church. Unfortunately, the church has adapted the world, and look at this. 2 articles in the paper, and you speak to parish priests, and it is frustrating that we end up with less money given, because the money that's given, which parishes are struggling anyway, are being given centrally and leaving less money for mission and even to maintain buildings, and it creates this snowball effect. If it was done the other way, from where the centre of power is, as it were, metaphorically, and all that thing is at the parochial level, at the local church, and the head office, the diocesan house, is there to help and support, and the money goes down when needed in those places that are showing areas of growth. Don't mind a bit of competition, you know what I mean? If you're in a church that is growing but hasn't got many resources, give them money. If there's a church that isn't, then you just don't get the money. That's, up your game. That's fair. Well, you don't want to plough money into something that isn't just going to burn money. That's ridiculous. Get the right person in there, get the right person preaching the gospel in there, and then resource that place and see the growth. That's, in a sense, what businesses do. That's one model that we would want, but that's the right thing to do anyway. You want to resource where growth is and get money there. So this is it's part of the conversation, isn't it? It's part of the conversation of what's happening in the Church of England. And I do pray that God's using all this, what we're going through, to change the local church, to change the way that we work. And let's just pray that he blesses local church who are standing on the word of God, are going out and preaching the gospel, who are serving those in the local parishes, and who are welcoming all who come in through those doors, but, wanting to transform those lives for God's glory, for his glory. And let's pray that as we go into next year, which is going to be a huge year, by the way, for the Church of England, with all that's going to go on in General Synod in 2025, that we do come back to what we are called to do. And that's to call people to repentance and preach the word of Christ. And as I said, be there for people, living our Christian lives amongst them, showing them a better way. How hard is that?